Yep.
Hey, consenting. There we go.
Magnificent. Hi, everybody. Welcome, Dr. Delahooke. Oh, wait, I reversed that. Oh my gosh.
Oh no, actually that works. That works. That's my name at my gym, Delamona.
My CNS is just so excited that I'm getting confused.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. So grateful to have you here. Before we start jumping into the really good stuff, I want to go through just some quick thank yous to everybody who's making this possible. So first of all, to you, Dr. Mona Delahooke, thank you for taking time on your Saturday morning to spend it with little old us.
You guys are not little old. You all are on a special type of hero's journey, and my heart is with you. And it's a really an honor for me to be with you. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to our sponsor, Ms. Leona Phyllis with Leona Phyllis Law Firm. She also has a child with special needs, and I'm so grateful to have her supporting me in these efforts to get all this information out to these other families. So thank you, Leona. I've got a bunch of information for everybody in the chat if anybody's interested in learning more about our guest speaker, about Leona. And then also thank you so much to everybody who's helped me get the word out about these webinars. Thank you to Sarah McMahon of the Team Approach. Thank you to Doug and Jennifer with Cure Duchenne. Thank you to all of the Facebook groups who approved and allowed me to share. Thank you, thank you. Let's see, and then lastly, thank you to everybody who's here today. I am a mother of a child with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. He's 10 years old, and it is a muscle wasting disease. And I've had challenges throughout the years since the diagnosis. It's been 6 years now. And recently, after I was chatting with Leona one day, I realized a lot of my challenges are coming from just typical patterns that show up in special needs families. And so I'm excited to be learning more about it and for having you guys here helping me with this next piece of the puzzle. So thank you, thank you. Okay, the good stuff. Dr. Mona Delahooke, I'm going to read your little bio real quick.
Oh, okay.
Unless you'd just like to share yourself, I'm happy to go either way.
Just do a quick one and I'll have a sip of tea.
Okay, fabulous. So Dr. Mona Delahooke is a licensed clinical psychologist with more than 30 years of experience caring for children and their families. She's a senior faculty member of the Perfectum Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting families of neurodiverse children, like mine, adolescents, and adults. Dr. Delahooke holds the highest level of endorsement in the field of infant and toddler mental health in the state of California. As a reflective practice mentor, Dr. Delahooke has dedicated her career to promoting compassionate, relationship-based neurodevelopmental interventions for children with developmental, behavioral, emotional, and learning differences. And believe it or not, guys, that is the short version. So.
Thank you. Oh my
gosh. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to jump into it.
Great.
So, Dr. Delahooke, my child has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and these are the things that he does. He screams when he can't find his dirty socks. He is deathly afraid of clean socks. He screams. He turns around logos on books, and he refuses to eat around them. He has huge meltdowns when he leaves the screen, and when plans change and friends have to cancel events or something, he will give the most blood-curdling yell. It sounds like somebody has been injured. So we've tried, you know, when I was starting off on this parenting journey, I followed what a lot of parents do, which is the standard authoritative, punitive sort of thing, and it never worked. However, your approach works. So, what is your approach? And how is it different?
Wow, and you should be on TV. What an interviewer you are. Thank you. The way you set that up, first of all, let me say that, you know, children have, and adults, we all have a range of behaviors that we can see. And children with neurodevelopmental differences, such as children with Duchenne, children with who have challenges and differences in the way their body and brain is processing their world, or will face challenges at some point, have been really historically, in my opinion, misunderstood when it comes to behavioral challenges. So the first thing we can think about is how incredibly adaptive behaviors are. So one of the messages that I write about in the book and talk about all the time, and one that is going against our current culture of medicalizing challenging behaviors. So some of you may have been told by members of your team, maybe a pediatrician, maybe a teacher, or maybe even a behavior specialist, with all due respect to them. I absolutely believe the people on our children's teams are so well-intentioned and love children. So this is not about blaming or shaming anybody. But the way that we understand behavioral challenges in our children, in all children, but especially in children with differences, is outdated when you look at what we call current relational neuroscience. What is that? Relational neuroscience was something that came up in the study of the brain. There were new technologies to study the brain in the 1990s. And they came up with this amazing tome of information in a big, huge, like, book called From Neurons to Neighborhoods, meaning from brain development to communities and relationships. And that stuff was what I was learning. I was just lucky during that time. I went back and I kind of was fed up with my own field of psychology, like making all behaviors look bad or a part of a disorder like oppositional defiant disorder, which is not really a disorder in my mind. So I was studying with some of the people who were doing this science and translating it into clinical practice. And Lindy, what I found was that, yes, even in my practice, when I started applying these principles about 20 years ago, over the sticker charts, the consequences, the parent blaming, like in IEP meetings, I often heard when the parents weren't in the room, like they're not being consistent enough. They're coddling the child. I heard all these things that were blatantly wrong. It's not the parent's fault. It's how we understand disruptive behaviors. So that opened up a whole new way of looking at them. And that is the really exciting part that I can't wait to talk to you guys about today. And yeah, it leads to so much more compassion to yourself and to children, I believe. Now, I had the pleasure of working with a child with Duchenne many years ago, but I've also worked with children who have progressive illnesses or progressive conditions. And a very common denominator for individuals who are going through rapid changes or even changes neurologically are things like big reactions to what we would consider small things. I love your example of only wearing dirty socks. I love it. I'm not his mama, but I love him already because there's a reason for that. It is, and I'll talk about that. Rigidity, big reactions to small things, agitation, and meltdowns are all responses that we can look at in a new way as what we call adaptive behavioral responses to protecting one's nervous system. Now, it's easy for me to say, and of course difficult in a family environment. And we have to learn, how to be authoritative, loving parents, and right, we have to run the show as parents. But there's just these new lens shifts that we can look at. And if your child is experiencing a lot of agitation or meltdowns, non-compliance, what seems like really like overreactions to what you might consider small things, please be assured it's not your fault and it's nothing wrong with your child.
So tell us more about that. Dr. Porges with the Polyvagal Theory, can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that plays into your approach?
Yeah, so there are different theories of the nervous system, but I am interested in the nervous system. Basically, what the nervous system is, in the most basic sense, is the communication from our body to our brain and our brain to our body, right? So we all take in information through touch, through our vision, through hearing, and all that. That information gets fed up to the brain. It's called the afferent neural pathways. And then that information gets integrated upstairs in a very complex way, integrated with all the other information from the senses, plus your past memories and your current environment. It's so complex. And then you have a behavior that you see. So in a split second, hundreds of millions of things are happening inside the brain and the body. The best explanation and the most compassionate explanation I found was from Dr. Stephen Porges, who has developed the Polyvagal Theory, which is just a theory about how the autonomic nervous system evolved. And he wrote this article in 2004 that really changed my life and my practice. And that it was called Neuroception, the subconscious detection of threat and safety. And in that article, he explained why you might have a child who, for example, sees clean socks and has a meltdown as an adaptive response to the nervous system, because his neuroception, which is subconscious, okay, subconscious means he's not thinking it, the body is doing it, is having this aversive reaction to a sight or a thought, nothing more. No malintention, not wanting to wreck the day for everybody, not wanting to create more stress for himself or his adoring parents. A child whose body is not comporting to our understanding of stress. So the polyvagal theory gives us a way of understanding three main pathways of the autonomic nervous system. And I'll say it's just a theory, so it could shift, but that doesn't deter me from sharing it with parents, because these three pathways are useful in understanding how available we are in the moment and how available our child is in the moment. So the pathways are, I just call the green pathways, the ventral vagal, but just call it the green pathways. When we're calm, we're available, we're talking, we're pleasant, we can say what's on our mind, and basically our body is calm enough to do our occupations, to do our stuff. That's the green pathway. Ideally, we'd like to see our children and ourselves spending about 70% of the day kind of feeling okay. But then there's that other 30 or more percent where we're not, and that's being human. The other pathways are the red pathway. That's known as the fight or flight response. That's where we find many of our children with neurological differences flipping onto this red pathway of agitation, running away, throwing things. It's, yelling, screaming, doing stuff that involves movement is a signal that the child's nervous system, again, not the child's choice, but their nervous system has moved from the green pathway to the red. And now we have to understand them in a new way. We have to understand them as being in the red pathway and help them from there. The third major pathway he describes is called the dorsal vagal. I call it the blue pathway. And that's when humans begin to disconnect and shut down. It could be anything from a response where kids are just like not wanting to talk and being kind of isolated and on their own, non-communicative, non-social. it could also be in super extreme circumstances, a freeze response where your nervous system detects such high levels of threat that you just freeze. Some children that I work with who are undergoing invasive medical procedures sometimes go into a freeze response because their body is detecting a high degree of threat. So basically, the polyvagal theory gives us a new way to understand behaviors as what I call the tip of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg is what we can see, is the behavior, but underneath the waterline, hidden from view, invisible, are those causes and triggers. And once we understand those better, hopefully it'll lead to less stress for us as parents, and also a more holistic way of looking at childhood behaviors.
So how do we help a kiddo get into the green or stay into the green?
Well, that is the question. And I wish I could say there was a script or a certain series of scripts that I could give parents, because they'd be out there if there was, right? As you probably know and have experienced, you may have gone to therapists, you may have read numerous books about, as you suggested, Lindy, on compliance-based and reward and consequence-based models. And honestly, if that works for you, great. If it feels good, if it feels like it's good for your child, if it fits with your family values as a parent, that's fine. But the approach that I've developed has to do with studying your child's nervous system and understanding what his exact triggers are. And then the roadmap is discovering the quickest and most efficient way back to green. And so you can have to discover it in chapter, I believe it's, where's my book? I think it's chapter 4 of Beyond Behaviors. I have different checklists of ways you can help your child with nonverbal, with non-speaking, because usually when your child's in the red, talking at them or to them isn't very effective. It's not because you're not saying the right things, it's because the nervous system is poised for defense. So talking at them or with them usually is not a good idea. What's more of a good idea is the nonverbal things, the gestures on your face, whether or not the child, when they're agitated, wants you close by, or maybe some physical distance. If the child, some children want a hand on the, a hand on the shoulders, others do not want to be touched. Some like to maybe listen to music. The point is, in that, when you realize the agitation has started, is to do the stuff that the nervous system, first of all, to try to calm ourselves, because I know that when your child is in a red pathway, that's the easiest trigger to the red pathway ourselves. Yes, I did throw a hairbrush in the direction of my children when they were not being quiet. That's going to be in my new book. Bam, I did scream bloody heck at one of my children and threw her in the car, and my a mom, a neighbor, was there looking at me. I'll never forget the look on her face, and the shame I felt, and the embarrassment and deep shame, and thinking I have to resign from being a psychologist this day. I'm worthless. So can I just say that losing it with our children we're human. We're human. It's going to happen. And self-compassion is my motto, because we can do a number on ourselves as parents. And believe me, I'll be first in line with that, because I thought that as a psychologist, I should know better, but it's not about our knowledge. It's about being human, being fragile, being vulnerable, and also understanding, for many of you, the type of stress that you are facing in your head, in your everyday life, with the therapies, the future planning, and just your own self-care that may take a hit by virtue of being a parent of a child with special needs, that that it's not always easy to stay green. So long answer to your question, Lindy, is we try to first of all, if we are losing it ourselves, make sure the child is safe, and then grab a minute, or if you can, get a little distance. Sometimes taking a couple of deep breaths with a longer exhale is useful for some people, not for all, but something that lets you know that helps you feel more calm in your body. And then in the moment, figuratively or in real life, put your hand over your heart and be gentle on yourself. Don't beat yourself up when your nervous system is already beating you up.
Thank you for that. I love your recurring theme of forgiveness. It's refreshing to hear over and over and over. So thank you for that. So to recap just briefly, it sounds like for some of our kiddos, and maybe it's more than some, with disabilities or neurodivergent, that there's some sort of sensory processing issue, because as you've said in your course, this is how we interact with the world, and something's triggered. And then these kiddos, they're in the red pathway. They need help to get back to the green. And it sounds like that's achieved through co-regulation with an adult.
Absolutely. That's achieved with co-regulation with adult. I'll elaborate a little bit about what you said, and I'm glad you recapped it, is that sensory processing is one of 4 larger categories. So there are really millions of reasons why a child might dysregulate.
Okay.
Millions. But I put them into 4 huge categories, each of which have millions of causes within them. So sensory processing is one of them. That would be perhaps at some point, like if the child only wants to wear a certain type of shirt, for example, that at some point over time, that sensation was comfortable to the nervous system. It felt good. And then shifting from that to something else caused agitation. And once that happens 2 or 3 times, the memory builds and builds and builds. And all of a sudden you have a child who's only wanting to wear one kind of shirt. So that's one category. And there's something we can help children with that, by the way. He doesn't have to wear the same shirt the whole life. And it's not something to be afraid of. It's really kind of cool in a way, because behaviors are adaptive subconsciously. And if you think about children, well, okay, I'm going to talk about control later in a second, but let me go through the 4 big categories first. The first is sensory processing. The second one is what we would call the physical body. So the physical body would be things like sleep. Yeah. How well did the child sleep the night before? How well, excuse me, did you sleep the night before? Sleep is our life support system. And many of us are getting less restorative sleep than we need, and including our children. So sleep is another category. The physical body. And then that also could include your neuroendocrine system, the types of medications you're taking, right? Stuff in our hormones, in our gut, constipation or other sorts of things that are happening in your actual physical body can help shift your pathway color. And the child's unaware of it. So that might be happening too. It might not be a sensory challenge. It could be having a shift in their body, blood sugar, etc. And I've described them in the book, a lot of them. The third category is like our conscious emotions. Emotions are how we make sense of the feelings in the body, our sensations in the body. Your children with conditions like Duchenne will have feelings and emotions about their body. We would expect that. And so sometimes our feelings and our emotions can drive our behaviors. And the last big, huge category is our thoughts. So our thoughts can tell us stories that drive our behaviors. So it's very rich. Behaviors are multi-determined, and they're useful. the thing that I fault my own field for, and I think they need to move forward, excuse me, is that they are stuck in the DSM model, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the way they diagnose psychiatric conditions. That was may have been a useful model in the 1950s when they started it, but now it's just a symptom checklist of behaviors. And many scientists and researchers agree that it's basically useless, especially Bessel van der Kolk, who is a world famous trauma researcher. And we have to consider on some level that experiencing a neurodegenerative condition involves some toxic stress and trauma for everybody involved, with compassion, that the DSM is, I think he calls it a doorstop. It's just worthless in that, because if your child is diagnosed with anxiety, many children have high levels of anxiety, but it's anxiety, not in the clinical sense, but a reaction to what's happening, right? So be careful, and don't fire your therapist or your psychiatrist for your child or your pediatrician. Just understand the context that they're working from likely will not be exactly what I'm talking about, because I'm in the minority. But luckily, it's I'm getting asked to talk to lots and lots of groups. And so I think this point of view that I'm not the only one talking about it is getting more and more popular amongst the medical community, et cetera. Yeah.
Magnificent. Excuse me. If I could just let everybody know real quick, if you have questions, please start popping them in the chat. Apparently I underestimated my questions here. So I want to get through a few more of these so we can paint the big picture. But if you'd like to start popping questions in the chat, I can put them in here as well. And I do still anticipate having time for you to talk directly with Dr. Mona Delahooke as well. So I feel like we've got a pretty good big picture of all of this. Oh, thank you, Mary. Let's switch gears and go to kids with disabilities now. So and I do want to say thank you for talking about the t-shirt thing. My son's physical therapist can attest that my son wore the same Batman shirt. I've actually saved it. You know how moms say,
yes.
2 years, Dr. The same shirt. And pros and cons, he's Duchenne, he's not growing as much, so we could keep it for 2 years. But yeah, that was a struggle, and now he's got his same 5 shirts that he wears.
Oh, that's an awesome record. I love that.
Now we're working on socks.
Please don't ever throw that out. Just keep it. I love it. Now we're working on socks. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and we won't even go into the night splints. We won't even touch those.
To the what? What was that?
The night splints. A lot of Duchenne kids wear the night splints to help with their range of motion and all of that stuff. And my son just couldn't tolerate it all. So we chose sleep over the night splints. Like you're saying, sleep is so important.
Sleep is so important.
Okay, so it sounds like one piece of the puzzle is the CNS, is the central nervous system. Yeah. So and I was reading an article about Duchenne, and I just want to say we have more than Duchenne families here. We've got kids with autism, we've got kids with Downs, we've got kids from all over. I know Duchenne, I live Duchenne. But I was reading an article, and it talks about that researchers are thinking now that the CNS, that the central nervous system, is actually affected directly by the Duchenne. And so I'm wondering if you find that with kids with disabilities across the board, if there is a specific, I guess the way the disabilities or the special needs are presented in the body, if they actually also kind of trigger the CNS just in and of itself.
Well, I would imagine absolutely. I will ask Dr. Porges that question, next time I talk to him, because I would imagine, because the vagal nerve starts from the starts up above the skull, and it goes down feeds down to above the diaphragm. And so these differences in the signaling, I can't imagine they wouldn't affect the autonomic nervous system, because everything does. And so in that way, we might also have more compassion for those ranges of emotions and behaviors, again, being triggered by a autonomic process, which means it's a subconscious process, right? Where all of a sudden you may feel yourself. So if someone here is talking about dystrophin. So let's think about neurochemicals, right? When those shift, we don't know it, but what you feel inside is a shift in your mood. And then so you might see a child become suddenly agitated or sad, maybe. The mood is a feeling state that comes from a shift in the body, or a shift in what's known as interoception, which is perception of things inside of our body. So it's very complex. I loved asking neuroscientists about this, but it's super complex. For me, the message is that there are the likelihood of a child's distressing or challenging or aggressive disruptive behaviors in our children who are not neurotypical is much greater. And our support, your support as parents and teachers' support in better understanding this, so that children aren't inadvertently shamed for their shifts in behaviors, is, I think, really important. Because our society is not very gentle about behavioral challenges. Please let me talk about our educational system. They're in the dark ages about behavioral challenges and are judging parents all the time. I saw it from behind closed doors, where I would be representing a parent, and then before the parents walked into the meeting, everyone was saying, well, we have to can you please work with these parents about being more consistent or having a better behavior chart? No, no, that's not the problem, folks. So you can tell I was probably really popular in some of the school districts I worked in.
I love that you brought up the interoception, because as I was listening to that part of the seminar, it clued into my brain that a lot of our Duchenne kids have GI issues. A lot of them have constipation issues because those muscles aren't working either. And so that gave me another layer to understanding my son, and trying to help support him for sure. So let's talk medical trauma. You talked on trauma briefly, or you touched on it briefly, mainly in regards to mistreatment, perhaps, unless I was misunderstanding or unless I was distracted in the seminar. But if we could talk about medical trauma and the experiences that these kids go through from a young age. I know you talked about the one child who had several surgeries before age 6 or something, and how our kiddos can have these triggers that we don't see. It could be a smell. It could be, maybe, and this occurred to me, maybe one of my son's issues with these little images, which have been labeled OCD, maybe they're really triggers that he corresponds with, the doctors. For years, the doctor always wanted to give him a sticker after he left. And lo and behold, guess what? My kid doesn't like stickers. He runs away from them. And this just occurred to me as we were talking.
Oh, that's a perfect example. That's a perfect example. So let's talk about how trauma and how basically everything encodes in our bodies. I'm really loving the neuroscientist Ruth Feldman Barrett right now. She is one of the top researchers that's cited around the world right now, and she's developed something called the theory of constructed emotions. And in a nutshell, what that theory says is that how we experience and essentially our emotions as either pleasant or unpleasant. Something is, you have this immediate sense of that's ugh, or that's okay, or somewhere in between. And then the how strongly we feel about the valence, they call it, but is this like super, super pleasant, or is this kind of mildly pleasant? Anyway, that is and how that happens is that over time, our brains wire to our experiences in the world. And the brain begins to predict what's going to happen based on our prior experiences. So it's similar to the idea of procedural or implicit memories. So what you're saying, so many children who have experienced medical interventions or trauma that involved unpleasant sensations or even pain have encoded those sensory tidbits in their implicit memory, right? Or in their non-conscious memory. But the brain will pull all those aggregate of those experiences up and predict what's going to happen now. And here is, here's somebody else. Audra, mine hates stickers and always refuses at the office. We might wonder, the association to stickers could be traumatic.
Yeah.
Again, not in his conscious memory, but in his body memory.
Yeah.
That's really, it's really kind of, it's just kind of, I think another way to look at this is a tribute to human survival. And we can cheer that child that says, no sticker thing, sticker things, and say, okay, that is your choice, buddy. And another thing I wanted to just touch on briefly, and that is, if your child experiences the situation in their body of losing control, like not having quite as much control over my body, over my physical body, then maybe he sees other kids having, and as their movement abilities shift, and think about having an extra controlling side to you, like having preferences of stuff you can control. Again, not consciously, but I don't think that it's a surprise that children who are experiencing these future and present changes would be more controlling and easily more agitated. And again, it's not your fault as a parent. This is a response that's happening in the child that is actually adaptive. And we just want to help them be able, as much as possible, to explore that and eventually talk about it, or not, as they want. Like, oh, here, Audra, my son calls his peers the regular kids. So how about those feelings of maybe realizing that you're not a regular kid, right? And that's where therapy, if you find a therapist or a guide for your child that is there in addition to you, because it's, as a parent, you are already carrying a heavy load, to have them be able to talk about this and express it in art or in words or in play, that's very useful.
So related to this medical trauma, a lot of the Duchenne kids, and I know sometimes kids with autism too, and I don't know about other neurodiversity so much, but OCD can be a label. And like I said, with my son's stickers, it's a label, OCD. And the current treatment is exposure response therapies. And to me, that's a very traumatic thing in and of itself, My son gets triggered into this red pathway. He doesn't have enough conscious thought to put any pieces together that, oh, okay, I experienced all that, but now I'm okay. To me, it just seems like a re-triggering of a pathway. Like if you get stuck with a needle every day, it's going to hurt the same amount. And you're going to know the pain's going to come and you're not going to learn to cope. So is there a non-traumatic way to handle something like OCD with those experiences, those treatments?
Well, I mean, that's okay. So here is again where I'm not intending, if any of you on the line are a behavior therapist or your psychologist uses cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure, I don't want to offend, but I would never use that. I don't use that because it's saying that the OCD is maladaptive and we need to basically flood the child enough so that they don't have this obsession anymore. And yes, there's data that it does work for some people in reducing obsessions. But my question is, at what cost and why? So in autism, for example, a lot of the way I was trained in autism treatment decades ago was that we take away objects of interest a child is obsessing about because we want them to play with other things and we want to expand their range. And when I shifted my approach to customizing it to the child's nervous system, we gave the child that stuff as much as possible. And some of those children became experts in subject areas, right? Like one child who's interested in bees became a head beekeeper, right? So a couple things around that. First of all, if you feel that the intense interest around a certain thing is disrupting the child's life and just, is actually holding a child back, there are creative ways to expand the child's interests through play-based therapies and therapies that incorporate the interest, but then use that interest and expand from there. It's not painful. It doesn't trigger the child into the fight or flight, the red pathway, and that's why I think play-based therapies are magic for children. And a play-based therapy would look different for a teenager, but the general idea for play-based therapies is that the child can explore their fears, their worries, their control, their interests. All of that comes out in play, and play is known to be the best kind of therapy for all children. And so a good play-based therapist for your child, regardless of the diagnosis, is kind of a pressure relief valve. And sometimes when they are able to explore on this more very basic level, their worries and concerns and their subconscious fears, the obsessions become less intense, just fall away. But if they don't, I would say, really, I am not as a psychologist, I do not worry about hyper-focus on things anymore. I value them for what they're telling us about what the child needs right now. And sometimes when we lean into it, the child's interests kind of expand on their own. Also, I should say that children with hyperfocus on certain toys or certain things generally have shift to another one eventually on their own. And again, we can welcome that too, because sometimes this translates later on into an intense interest on another subject where they may excel in school with. So I guess my message is we don't need to worry about it as much.
Okay, very good.
Someone said Lisa Feldman Barrett. Ruth Feldman is another researcher. Yeah, Ruth Feldman is a researcher in Israel. If you're thinking about that one, she's amazing. She does research on early childhood development, attachment, attunement. Oh my gosh, I love her work. I love her work too. Lisa Feldman Barrett just wrote a book called, oh, it's right here. She's
Just
okay.
handy.
Look at my, there's a little book called 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. And wow, I have got like 100 pages like tabbed. So Lisa Feldman Barrett she's lives in the US in Boston. She's on the, I think, faculty for Harvard Medical. And I'm really into her stuff right now. And can we help them scaffold into other interests? Yes. Yeah. So when we follow a child's lead, we can scaffold based on following their lead. I think that's the key. I was going to mention a bit about control and over control. If your children are wanting to really control their environment, and have difficulty in changes in routine when something changes that they weren't expecting, or really want to have over control. I think that, again, if you think about how adaptive our human brains and bodies are, when you're losing control of your physical body, then control becomes an adaptive way to feel better. And then as we help them expand through co-regulation, which is basically witnessing the struggle, like, hey, whoa, okay, I see this is hard right now. Hey, let's slow it down. Let me sit by you for a second. That's an example of a type of co-regulation. Where we share our green pathway with the child. So if we slow it down enough and respect that what their meltdown is in that moment, or their agitation, or their needing to be in control, is we just kind of witness the underlying, like, okay, all right, we'll slow it down a little bit. I realize it's really hard, but it eventually helps the control become a little less powerful because they need it less often, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a tricky thing with our kids with Duchenne, at least. As they progress, they try to control more and more, and these issues of OCD and control, they start to affect their social lives. And we want a rich social life for them as much as possible. They've got so many hurdles already, just from being non-ambulatory, or the chair, or a feeding tube, or just being away from school or friends because of medical treatments. And so, when you've got this personality difference, and it's not only controlling the environment, it's controlling other people.
Yeah,
it's to be pretty
tricky. And that doesn't work real well in making friends and establishing relationships, because other people, it can be off-putting.
Yeah.
Totally. That, yes. Yeah. I hear that. And I think that if I were to say the therapeutic gains from being with a therapist and having your parents give you therapeutic interactions that help you befriend your nervous system, so that eventually, if a child can learn, oh, right now, okay, I can feel my heart racing. Oh, my hands are sweaty. I'm pissed off. I'm upset. What can I do in this moment to be gentle to myself? So that is an example of befriending your nervous system. And I think that the teaching part eventually, but not until the child really feels able to do that, is to be like, okay, I'm agitated, and buy a few seconds to think, well, if I do this right now, my friend here is not going to be happy. So maybe I buy a moment and I breathe or whatever, and I rephrase it. because we know they want to have friends, right? They don't want to turn people away. But I think helping children, like the therapist Deb Dana uses the polyvagal theory for adults, and she talks about helping adults befriend their nervous systems. And I think we do the same for children. We help them befriend these big reactions that are happening inside. You know, the Audra here is saying, what about when they're lashing out, throwing, hitting, screaming things like, I hate you, I'm going to kill you. That these are big red pathway reactions. So these are the type of reactions when a child lands in the fight or flight pathway. And so the support needs to be multimodal, meaning across your team, the child's team. And so I'm imagining most of you have the child's specialist, the medical doctors, perhaps a psychiatrist, and maybe a therapist, teachers, but you know, there may be the supports could be across systems. I don't know if there are any pediatricians or medical doctors on the call, but I'm not sure about the types of medications that are working or helpful. It may be individual to each child's body, but that is one I'm thinking about. I don't know if there are studies about mindfulness. Oh, yes, steroids, please. If any of you have taken prednisone, I remember I've taken it before, and I had a very adverse reaction in terms of my emotional state. So steroids, like there may be different reactions in different people, right? But the medications can also make you tend to be more agitated. And these are physiological things. So I guess the answer to that is, okay, when a child in the moment, when a child is saying horrible things and throwing and kicking, understand that at that point, the fight or flight system does not allow the social engagement system, which is the green, to work. So it's a compassion moment where we're like, okay, we are in a kind of we're in an emergency situation here. We need to de-escalate, help de-escalate the child. And if you think about when you are in a de-escalation, in an escalated state, if someone like yells, like, control yourself, you know, that usually doesn't work, right? When I'm super pissed off and my husband will say, stop, control yourself. I'm like, no, you know, so it's tricky. And again, yeah, I hear Robin saying mindfulness interventions. The best interventions are the ones that work for your child. So interventions that touch the body, like mindfulness, like breathing, like yoga, if the child likes it and the parent likes it. There's some pretty hefty research on how mindfulness and mindful meditation, that's the work of John Kabat-Zinn, helps the parasympathetic nervous system become more available.
Most definitely. It's funny because so for various reasons, we've been homeschooling for years. It's a better fit for our kid with medical needs. And his neurotypical peers, or I'm assuming they are, they're doing these mindfulness workshops, and I'm so envious of it. And I just know it's still going to be a few years down the road. My son's 10. He's not there yet. We're still working on that co-regulating. We're still working on getting him to the play step. So he's not even at the point of that mindfulness, unfortunately. Yeah, and Audrey just said, what if they refuse to do mindfulness?
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, Lindy, because one of my pet peeves is that we are doing mindfulness too soon. There are some programs that I've evaluated where they're having preschoolers learn mindfulness. And it's like, that is before self-control of emotions, self-regulation begins to emerge at age 2 to 4, and then it continues to the mid-20s. So Thank you for saying that. I give permission. And in fact, I urge you, don't try to teach a child techniques before they have sufficient experiences of co-regulation with you or with their teacher and with their grandparents, whoever, all those individuals in the child's life. Co-regulation in human beings is the pathway to self-regulation, which highlights for parents how important it is to have self-care, especially if you're schooling at home, as everyone has been in the pandemic, or most everybody. It is it's super important to be understood. Oh, here, Mary Herman, Frostig School is a small private school that understands neurodivergent children. It changed our son's life. Half of the students there are funded by their school district. So if you have access to alternatives to regular education, if you feel like your child is misunderstood and their behaviors are misunderstood, to be able to find funding for appropriate placements, it is so important. They're not cognitively ready at a very young age. Yeah, they're not. And again, I don't think our medical system understands the power of emotional co-regulation. It is the vehicle. So when you are upset as a human, to have another nervous system there to help you calm down. Feldman Barrett talks about it as a body budget. Sometimes you need another human to make deposits into your body budget so you can balance yours. And that's what our children need. From what I'm hearing from you here is that your children need more deposits into their body budgets. They need deposits so that they can start to learn how to regulate or control their emotions and behaviors by talking about them rather than acting out on them. That doesn't mean they won't have anger and, be pissed off about what's happening sometimes in their bodies. Of course they will. That's robust. That's amazing. But what we want to help them do over time through co-regulation is to be able to say just that. Mom, Dad, I am so pissed off right now. Da-da-da-da-da happened, right? That's so much better than putting your hand through a door, right? Or to kick something. But it takes time.
And I love what you said there about these other emotions. They're not bad. It's a part of human life. It's
yes.
The red pathway and the blue pathway, they happen to everybody. So thank you for taking a minute to.
Absolutely. It's just as much to be scared and angry. It's just as human to be scared and angry as it is to be happy and joyful. They are all legitimate.
I know we're getting close to our wrap-up time. I would love to try to just squeeze in maybe one or two other questions real quick. And one is a wrap-up about meds. And the last one is other adults in your child's life who don't adhere to this principle and are still punitive. So let's go to the meds first. A lot of our kids do have, and we've touched on this briefly, a lot of our kids do to manage their disease state, they take meds that have these aggravating side effects, like the prednisone and deflazacort. Lots of families decide to put their kids on it, and some families don't also. You've got to weigh the whole thing. But for these challenging behaviors that are medicinally induced so that they can help extend and preserve the life of your child, what do you do? And how do you manage them? And how do you explain to your child when he's not in control? And, it's just so big.
It's so big. Let's just say how big it is. The toll that it takes on you to witness your child going into the fight or flight response is big. So again, it goes back to compassion. As gentle as you all can be to yourself, as gentle as we can be to ourselves as parents, just knowing it's big, because this is kind of a horrible choice, right? I mean, some of you are going to make one choice, and others, it's private, it's intimate, it's your choice as a parent. But let's just say you do choose the medical part, that do go to the steroids or other medications that impact emotional and behavioral control. Again, the main principle is learning when the child's body needs a deposit and when they can handle it on their own. Sometimes all children can manage something on their own. They just need a little time and space to work it out. So, okay, buddy, I get it. Let me know if you need any help. But other times they need active deposits that you'll have to figure out based on your child's nervous system on what those deposits are. And I have some ideas in the book, some checklists that you can kind of do to say, okay, I'm going to go, this is what's more soothing to my particular child, whether it's not talking or space or the type of touch and all that. But so the co-regulation is the key until your child is ready to have a conversation about their nervous system. So at some point, and only you and your child's therapist and their teams will know when it's right, but at some point to say, to let the child know, buddy, sometimes this medication can make your engine run fast, or I have a way of talking about the nervous system and beyond behaviors. I don't use colors. The color system is just for adults. I don't use colors because there's this idea, many classrooms in the US and Canada use behavior charts with colors. And so I don't use that with the kid. I have the child choose their own names for each of the 3 main pathways. And that's in chapter 6, I believe, 5 and 6 of Beyond Behaviors. So the child chooses it, and we help them befriend the red and blue pathways. And so it's called awareness. And when your child's ready, and some children may not be ready until they're 15. So please don't think that you have to do this if your child's 7 or 8 or 10. But when the child is ready, and some children would be ready by, 7 or 8 or 10, but it's so unique to each child, then we can let the child, like, Mom, this is what's happening. Then they use their special word. It's like, okay, this is it. And then they have a drop-down menu. Okay, these are things I need to do right now. So we can help a child befriend their nervous system. And have compassion for it. Now, really quick, what do you mean by a deposit? A deposit is anything that the other person's, it's for adults too, but the other person's nervous system feels as calming, loving, and supportive. So it could be a comment. It could be handing them some food. It could be lying down with them and taking a nap. It could be taking a walk. A deposit is something we do with another, for it and with another person that helps them calm down. Great question. Sharing your calmness. Let's see, I think that understanding your green pathway doesn't look like my green pathway is very helpful. Yes, it is so individual. So Mary is saying that we tried hard with non-medication approaches, and then we had to start medication. So again, this idea that there is no one road, that, everyone needs a team that helps them for their child. But medications can also be useful, right? If it works for your child. And then I think the key is to find a way to help the child access relationships and to have relationships guide relationships are what gets all of us through life. And those relationships that start in our families are so important. So if you have a medication approach that helps the child access their relationships, as Mary is saying here, would help with a relationship with a younger sibling. How beautiful is that? We want to establish safety in relationships as the core. So Kristen is saying, when the trigger is perpetual and unable to be controlled, i.e. another family member, here's a very tricky and important question. So we want to find out, what is triggering with that other family member, and can you work together or with someone to help that family member go from being triggering to being safety inducing? And it's possible. It just takes some digging. And sometimes it's changing a little bit about how that family member engages with the child, so that they are appreciating the child's sensory, body, thoughts, and emotions. Remember those big 4 categories.
And I'm Kristen, I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm gonna up the ante just a little bit. There you go. Family members, nonverbal, multi-disability. What if it's somebody who's not willing, who doesn't want to change? What if it's another sibling? What if you've got that type of perpetual stress in your family?
Yeah, that is, it's kind of like when you have a situation where your out of control child hits a sibling, and then at that moment you have, and you're managing yourself. So you've got 3 nervous systems going on. What do? You know that the child who hit the sibling is out of control and they need support. The hit sibling is kind of the victim, so they need support. And then you are caught in the middle of all this, right? And so at this, somehow by Herculean strength, you make sure that the hit sibling is okay, and you let them know that, of course, it's not okay that your brother hit you. Honey, I'm here for you. Let's make sure that ouchie's okay. And then the offending brother would be like, dude, I know you didn't mean to hurt her right now, but we're in a situation. So, you have to keep the child safe, and then try to calm the nervous system of the offending child. And this is where I really, really encourage you, if you're able to have a compassionate team, a great psychiatrist or developmental pediatrician who understands your child and will help you figure out if medication is useful or not. A therapist who can support you and be kind of a guide to this madness that feels so chaotic sometimes. And then the support for the siblings, if those siblings are not able, they're, for example, non-speakers, or unable to understand, we really need to advocate for a lot of protection and support for that child. And if there are resources available, and hopefully there would be somehow through public systems, to maybe have a supportive person in the home, an aide or someone to help monitor and make sure everyone's safe, and is playing. Every single child in the world can play. A non-speaker can play and should play. And I guess I'll, as we're winding down, this is one of my one of the hopeful things is that a big part of being human is to manage the distress we feel in our bodies. And that distress is best managed for children, for little children, but also for older children and adults, when what it looks like is through pretend play. So adults is like not pretend. That's more like having coffee with a friend, or kicking a soccer ball, or using your wheelchair and acting, or being in a drama class or something. Play changes. But if you can get your child into a situation where they're able to play, their themes they choose in play is what they are working on subconsciously. So I love doing play therapy with the children that I work with who are having medical interventions, children undergoing chemotherapy, children undergoing surgeries, children who have disorders or diseases that are progressive, and anything, including the death of a parent. Play is an outlet that is so customized. If you follow the child's lead, it is so customized to them getting out of their bodies their worries and concerns. So if you have a child and you are able for maybe 10 to 15 minutes a day to sit on the floor and have a variety of toys available, not mechanical toys that make noises necessarily, but stuffed animals and dinosaurs and maybe just toys that can help with pretend play and creativity, and maybe the child can project their concerns about their family onto the characters in the play. That is the work I do now on the floor with children, and that's really useful. So any other final questions? These questions have been so good. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Delahooke. It's a lot to cover, and thank you for graciously spending an extra 10 minutes with us. Thank you so much. How can people be in touch? How can they learn more? It seems like we've just hit the tip of the iceberg.
I know. We'll have to do this again.
I would love it.
Yeah, this is great. Zoom brought in I last year in 2020. Oh, here's somebody. In 2020, I had like 15 live appearances that all got canceled and put onto Zoom. And then it ended up being more like 30 because you don't have to travel. So it's kind of cool. So
wonderful.
Yeah, so stay in touch. The one way I have a newsletter, so it goes out very infrequently, maybe 3 times a year, but I'll be posting about the trainings. I have an online training, if it's a 6-hour training, and some parents have paid for it's inexpensive. The parents have paid for their members of their team to watch it. So that's on my website, monadelahooke.com. Sign up for my newsletter. I'll send out just infrequent opportunities to learn more about this approach and share it with your team. And then on Facebook, Mona Delahooke, PhD, I just share like studies and thoughts and stuff. If you're on Facebook, if you even have time, Instagram at Mona Delahooke. Oh, thank you for putting it up there. And I understand that time is probably something you don't have. So I try to put snippets up on social for parents to feel encouraged on a day when maybe they'll need a little boost or need to remember a little something, because unfortunately, one of the greatest sources of stress, I think, for many parents is insurance companies and getting things paid for, the enormous amount of hoops you have to jump through for administrating your child's care, but also the education system, because they don't understand special needs well in general. There are many special schools across the country that do. There are many educators across the country that do. But unfortunately, in my travels and in my many communications with parents, this misunderstanding of children's behaviors and labeling them as psychiatric diagnoses is still causes a lot of stress for parents. So gentleness on yourself. And yeah, stay in touch.
Thank you. So guys, our next webinar will be next month. Dr. Delahooke, I think you've heard of him once or twice, Dr. Ross Green.
Oh, yes. Oh, love him. He's so great.
So we'll be continuing this conversation, but on the next level, once your kids are at the point where they can problem solve, how to do that collaboratively with them and how to make progress and how to help them maintain some of their control while finding a solution that works for everybody.
Yes, and see, it's perfect that I came first because I am the foundation.
Yes.
And then Ross is on problem solving when your children are really in that ability to talk about, represent their thoughts and feelings. And so I'm glad I came first, because Ross and I laugh about this, that he thinks I'm just like the way down. And I am. I'm like the underfill, and he's the trees with the branches. So perfect timing.
Magnificent.
Stay in touch, everybody. Take good care of yourselves, and your children are blessed to have you as their parents.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Delahooke.
Thanks.
Have a great, great day.
Thank you. You all too.
Bye.
Bye now.